Hi guys!
Hello, we are live. Hello.
We have a lesson today. It's something that AnnaMaja and I have actually been planning for a while, but we were both very busy earlier
Yeah.
on in the year. And I know I'm very excited though, because
Mm-hmm.
I started to play the French a little bit before the Olympiad, and I actually played it at the Olympiad, but I still
Mm-hmm.
don't really know much theory. And I used to
Yeah,
play the
it's quite a lot.
Caracan, so I think I mixed them up maybe a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Um,
had the same, and especially when I started, it's a lot
mhm,
of different lines. And,
mhm,
the general idea is pretty much the same, but there's some minor details that you might confuse very easily. And
mhm.
that especially happens when you just start off with a new opening. So that makes sense. And yeah, I hope that we get to discuss as much as possible about the French today because there's a lot to the French. And I'm not sure how much we will fit in 2 hours today, but we'll see how it goes.
No, I'm very excited. I don't know what you've got planned, but I was playing Rapid on stream yesterday and I had two games in the advanced French and
Mhm.
I won them both, but I had absolutely dead lost positions in both of them.
Oh,
So
well, if you still have time, we can discuss them or like
oh
during the
no, I
lines
don't
that
want
we
to show you
discuss.
them. You don't want to see them. Trust me, you really don't want to see them.
If you want, you can always ask questions. I mean, I have
Mhm.
things prepared, but it might be just, you don't understand anything what I'm saying,
Mhm.
or you might still be like, okay, but what if this happens? Then what? What am I supposed to do? Stuff like that. So you can always ask questions or interrupt me. I'll just
Mhm.
discuss the lines that I have prepared. And yeah, I try to keep it as minimal as possible because it is going to be a
Mhm.
lot. And I know, 2 hours is still quite a lot and there's a lot to talk about, but it might just be like, chaotic in your head when you see so many different lines. So I try to explain as much as possible, but also as, minimal as possible so you get the main idea. So we also don't go too deep into the lines because it can get pretty wild.
No, yeah, I feel like especially at my level, there's like people will deviate from theory quite early on. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm not too concerned about learning full lines too in depth.
Yeah, exactly. It's about the
Mhm.
main idea, what you need to do, what the plans are, and where your pieces need to go. Because yeah, it's especially important when they deviate that you still know your own plans. Because typically when they deviate, your plans are still pretty valid.
Yeah, exactly, because there's still a lot of themes that pop up from this similar positions.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I'm excited. Yay.
Yay. All right. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yeah. So for the audience, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to look a bit to the chat as well. It might be a bit difficult, but we'll see.
Mhm.
This is both for Lila and for the audience. So yeah, I hope you guys are gonna enjoy this bit of French opening today. So
I
obviously,
sorry.
yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
I don't have your chat open. Would you like
Oh,
me to, or is it better if I
doesn't
don't?
matter, whatever you
Okay.
prefer.
Okay, cool. I only have one screen here, so I'm like trying to save on screen space. But yeah, I figured they can like type backseating in there, I guess. And then I can't read it in case you
It's
have
okay. It's
questions.
okay.
Okay,
I
cool.
use Chatterino to have two chats open at the same time. It's pretty
Oh, okay,
useful, and I can put it on top of my chess screen, like the
that's
chess window.
nice. That's cool.
So yeah, that's pretty convenient. All right, let's get started. So yeah, the French is obviously e4, e6,
Hmm.
and today we're going mainly discuss d4,
Yeah.
because that's the most played line in this French opening, and there's a lot of different lines here. And yeah, generally the main ideas are the same, but every single line has its own small details and small ideas. So before we get into the line specifically, I want to talk about, okay, so you have this pawn structure, and people often complain about the fact that why would you play this with the bishop on c8 when you can play the Caracan and simply free your bishop all the way to f5, and then you also play e6 anyways?
Hmm.
What's the point? Now, that's an interesting question. So personally, I tried the Caracan for a little while, and I noticed that my bishop on f5 was actually bothering me because it was the target all the time.
Mm.
And besides some really boring and dry lines, there were also some really sharp lines. I believe you also played the Caracan, right?
Yeah, there are some really difficult lines for black in the Caracan, like really aggressive
Yeah.
ones for white. So I agree 100%.
Yeah, you have
Especially
the
with,
towel and
h4. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I played this with the white pieces, so I really enjoyed, the sharpness of it. But with the black pieces, I was not having it. So I quickly dropped the Caracan and went back to the French actually. And yeah, I started to love it more and more now, even more than before. So yeah, this structure is interesting. Typically, I mean, just to illustrate it for a moment, if they play e5, you might be like, okay, there's nothing going on in the center. The position is closed. This bishop is not going anywhere ever. But there are some interesting ideas here. The focus is mainly on the center. Of course, there's attacks going on where black is focusing on the queen side and white is focusing on the king side. But there's also something happening in the center. So black's main idea is to push c5, because the reason why is because you have this pawn chain and you want to attack the base of this pawn chain most of the times. Now you might say, okay, but if you get c5, I'll just play c3 and I'm just defending the pawn d4. But we keep defending this pawn, we keep attacking this pawn on d4. And sooner or later, we will see in the line specifically that the main targets are the d4 pawn and or the pawn at e5. It really depends. You also, besides the move c5, you have f6. You can also attack the top of this pawn chain. And that also weakens if you trade those pawns, if you trade the pawn from f7 with e5, then this pawn on d4 also becomes a weakness. So those are the main ideas in the French regarding the center. For white, white typically goes for f4 and f5. This pawn e6 is quite the target for white, which is a bit strange to see from this position, because you might think, okay, it's very well defended by the bishop and the pawn. But white can get a lot of attacking on the king side, and this is one of the main ideas. And later on, you will see that e6 can become quite weak.
Yeah, no, that's very aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are basically the main ideas in this opening. And every single line has its different plans and ideas. And sometimes you combine both the c5 and f6, but c5 is really one of the main moves to be played, especially right now. But yeah, just to illustrate what the pawn structure is about. And soon we will see it in more detail what this pawn structure actually means, because in openings, pawn structures matter so much. It really defines the position, and it helps you to create plans, basically, if you understand the pawn structure. So first of all, I wanted to look at the Tarrasch. So what do you play against knight d2 yourself?
I hate knight d2. I don't like it. I actually don't have any prep. I think I play c5 and hope that they play e takes d5, and so I can recapture with the queen.
Okay, that's the main line of the Tarrasch. Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes they don't, though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so there's a lot of, I guess there is 4 main moves in this position. And today we're going through 2 of them because those are my favorites, and it can get really interesting in those 2 lines. So you have obviously c5. You can take on e4, which is a pretty dry line, and you can play it, but I don't really play it myself. Maybe once in a while when I feel like changing it up. But it's not what you would prefer to go for generally. You also have knight f6, and you have bishop e7. Bishop e7 is a little bit, a bit too solid to my liking. I played it sometimes because, as I said, I want to deviate a little bit sometimes and play something else. But I generally don't really play this. For the longest time, I'm either playing c5 or knight f6 pretty much. So let's first talk about knight f6. So knight f6, the reason why I like playing knight f6 here is, first of all, I'm attacking the pawn. And second of all, this knight is on d2. And as you can probably tell, the knight is blocking this bishop. It can't really develop here. The queen, it's blocked in a way. You don't really have plans to move this queen anywhere here, but still it restricts you from defending the pawn with the queen, and I think that is a crucial detail still. And yeah, obviously I'm developing a piece, so why not? So this line goes like e5. They typically push a pawn. They can also take on d5, but then you go back to your French exchange, and with a knight on d2, I'm not sure if that's what white is looking for. So e5, knight fd7, that's pretty standard. White develops bishop d3, and you go here with c5. You attack this pawn over here, the base of the pawn chain, and white defends it by playing c3. Black is attacking the pawn on d4 once again. And here there is the move knight e2. Now, you can also defend the pawn by playing knight g to f3. But as you can probably tell, I personally would not like to play this move if I was white, because you want to put the knight from d2 to f3. Now this knight is a little bit restricted. You'll have to go through f1 to g3, and you're wasting some time. And it's also playable, but I would say that knight e2 is mostly played and pretty much the main move here, because you want to put the knight on f3, and the knight on e2 is perfectly fine. And here is an interesting position. So what would you play here if you were playing with the black pieces?
I've never played this with knight f6 before.
That's all right. That's all right.
So,
just whatever comes up in your mind.
It
doesn't have to be very accurate or something.
I guess like candidate moves I would consider would be like queen b6, bishop e7. I don't know if you can play f6, maybe not. I never know when it's the right time. I think I always try and delay it as much as possible.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, we'll get to that.
You could probably calculate taking on d4 as well. Those would probably be my candidate moves.
I like those moves a lot. Yeah. So yeah, queen b6 seems pretty fair. Bishop e7 also, they're very nice developing moves, but they're pretty much two main moves. I mean, okay, not really two main moves, but two moves that are mostly being considered here. And as you said, f6 is one of the main moves in this type of structure. You want to destroy this pawn structure here. If you play f6, e takes f6, queen takes, and then you're putting so much pressure on this pawn. And you also get to develop your queen, your bishop goes out to d6, and it's pretty nice. However, there's one problem when you play f6 right now. White gets to play knight f4. And do you see the problem?
Yeah, the e6 pawn.
E6 pawn becomes very weak. And as I said before, this E6 pawn can become a huge target. And this is why we are not able to play F6 just yet, because E6 becomes a problem. You can defend it by playing Queen E7, but then you have to face moves like Queen H5. And it's still, according to engine, playable, but that's not really what we're looking for. We want to have a more solid and more normal position than voluntarily go for this. But yeah, it is playable according to engine, but I would not recommend it.
I would not like this position.
So that brings us to c takes d4. Now, the reason why c takes d4 is a good move here is because it's a very concrete sequence of moves. So after c takes d4, now you're actually able to play f6. Do you see why?
Because if knight f4, you can take on d4 and protect the e6 pawn.
Exactly. So knight f4 and knight takes d4, and suddenly you're able to defend this pawn. Now, the move queen h5 is still in the position, so you still have to know something and be careful. This is actually... it doesn't really happen so often, but I got it a few times in Blitz online, and yeah, people tend to play this, so it's kind of nice to know what you're doing here, I guess. But yeah, white sometimes sacrifices the pawn d4, and they go for an attack. So queen h5, and you don't need to worry about this. I mean, it's a bit scary because, as you can probably tell, you're losing material. After king e7, there's knight g6 type of moves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit scary. They first typically take on f6 just to capture the pawn, and then after knight takes, they go knight g6.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like you're losing exchange. And that is obviously a bit scary, but black gets a lot of compensation for this.
Okay.
So after h takes g6, queen takes
Mm-hmm.
h8, and you're gonna play king f7 to defend this pawn on g6. And this
Mm-hmm.
queen looks a bit silly on h8, and it feels like you're gonna get checkmated in a few moves, right, with the black pieces.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. But the thing is that this bishop is not able to do much here on g6. The queen is not able to attack anything. The knight is covering so many squares over here. It will be very difficult for white to attack. This knight is blocking the bishop once again. And once the knight gets to f3, I mean, you can always consider taking. And yeah, you ruin the opponent's pawn structure. And you have the center. The center is super important. And it's one of the main things in the French that you get the center. And you can get the center. And this can become really, really strong and really vital. So sooner or later, so for example, what could follow is queen h4, simply to get out of this corner where you're not doing anything. And black simply plays e5. Oh, e5. And yeah, you just got a really nice position. Your bishops are able to develop very quickly. You can play bishop f5. You have the move e4 at your disposal. Your rook comes out. And yeah, one of the main moves here is knight f3. And then you can simply give a check. And it becomes a bit difficult for white to play this. I mean, you still need to play, both sides need to play pretty precise here. But the main idea is that black doesn't need to worry about being down exchange. They have a lot of compensation for this.
Okay.
So do you understand that? Do you have any questions so far?
No, it's the kind of position that I am not super familiar with, so I would definitely need to play a lot of them to, I think, get a better understanding of it. You know?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, after the lesson, I can like send you the file, and you can like look at it and
thank you. That'd be awesome.
See what you like and see what you want to play. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on, but this is basically the main idea in this variation. In case they go for this tricky line, it can get tricky, and it's important to know what to do there and not to feel like you're already losing or something, because you're not.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is if they play after f6, if they play knight f4. So generally they don't play this, but it's good to know what you need to do after knight f4. If they play if you play f6 and they take, then you have the option to take with the knight. So you can take with a knight on f6, and you get a nice position where you can develop the pieces, bishop d6, queen b6, and so forth. You have the half open f file. So if you castle, then you get a nice rook on f8 that can do a lot there. But what I personally prefer to play is queen takes f6. It's a bit scary to develop your queen so early, but there it works. It works. And I'll show you in a few moves. So the main move here is knight f3, simply because the pawn d4 was hanging, but also because they are threatening to play bishop g5, and that's a bit scary. So what would you do about this move? How would you what would your move be with the black pieces?
To prevent bishop g5?
Yeah.
I guess h6.
Yeah, h6. Yeah, h6 works perfectly fine. You can also give a check, I guess, but there's no need to do that. h6 is a pretty good preventive move. And here, I mean, white can play either castles. Bishop f4 looks sometimes a bit scary because you want to, you want to develop your bishop to d6, and this is preventing you to go there. Then you can simply give a check. And they can't really go back. I mean, they can, but yeah, I mean, they just wasted a move then. So that doesn't really do much. They typically play king f1 here, and then you simply castle. And yeah, you have a nice position. King hasn't castled. So yeah, looks pretty good. There are some ideas here, but they're very similar to the position we're going to look at. So I'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
So quite typically castles here. And now you're able to play bishop d6. Later, if we still have some time, I'll show you a game how I actually played this line and how I put my pieces, what my plans were. But for now, I'll show you what the main idea is in this position. So, for example, if white plays move knight g3, which is a logical move, black plays castles. And here I have a question for you. So this is the moment where you have castled, you have put your pieces on some squares and so on. We're out of the opening. And typically what people are struggling with is finding a nice idea after the opening. They're like, okay, I put my pieces here. This course or this person told me this and that. Now what? What do I do? So it's important to ask ourselves, okay, what is the plan here? And typically what it involves after the opening is that you want to improve pieces, you want to develop more pieces, and you want to figure out which piece needs to be improved. So my question to you, which piece needs to be improved here?
Well, definitely our c8 bishop. Maybe also our d7 knight.
Right. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. So now the question is, how would you do that? And you have to be a little bit creative here, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how to improve those pieces.
So, in terms of the bishop, I guess you can try to play like b6, a5 and get it out onto a6.
That's a very typical idea, yeah.
I guess you could also put it on d7 if you can move the knight and either maybe it can do something on the queen side, or I guess it could take a really long route and go to e8 and then g6 maybe.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's what we're looking for here. So basically, I have a I have a TTS. I'm sorry. It's very loud. Oh gosh, thanks Gogo for the 15 months. Oh gosh, that was super loud. Okay, sorry. So yeah, very good. Bishop d7, and you want to go all the way to g6. You found out very well that there's not much to be done here. b6, a5 is a very typical idea in the French to develop the bishop and also trade it off with the other bishop. So yeah, but in this position, it's a little bit slow, and your pieces are configured in such a way that it might be a bit difficult to play around it afterwards. Like if you get your bishop to a6, your knight is weak on c6, and it feels a bit loose. So that's why we have to go a bit to take the longer routes, basically. And we play, so for example, imagine if white does anything here, rook e1 for it, let's say, then you can play the move rook f7.
Okay.
And it looks a bit odd because you're like, what? Why would you do this? Your rook is already well placed. We're making space for the knight. So the idea is we play knight f8. Well, let's say white does anything like on a3. Knight f8, for example, b4. And now you can play, okay, you can play either rook here already, or I guess it's, I guess it doesn't really matter what comes first. But yeah, imagine rook c7. And the idea is you put your bishop all the way to g6. And you can include the move g5 whether you want it or not. I personally prefer it because I like to be aggressive and attack on the king side. But you don't have to do it if you're a bit too scared for that, which is definitely understandable. It can get pretty wild here. So yeah, that's basically the idea. And yeah. Thanks, Sir Patchel, for the 5 months. They do it on purpose now. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I should have removed the TTS. Maybe I mute the alerts. I think that's a good call for now. So yeah, basically, you put the bishop to g6, and because you have this plan in mind, whatever white does, you're almost all the time able to fulfill this plan. Now, I have to admit, I learned this line a few years ago, like more like 6 years ago or 7. So the line is a little bit outdated, as in the engine is not really happy about this line anymore, which is why I've been switching around left and right with the lines here. But I always love playing this line because I know what I'm supposed to do. And it's one of the very few lines where, for example, if I play 3+2, after like 15 moves, I still have 3 minutes on the clock, you know, because my plan is so straightforward and there is barely anything that my opponent can do to stop me. I mean, my plan is just, I put the bishop here, I play g5 as well, and we just go attack. What you also can consider playing at some point is e5. But you have to be careful with this pawn. You have to make sure that the pawn is safe before you decide to play e5. But you know, if it's possible, you can go the short route and play e5, and that's also the way to open up the bishop. But it doesn't happen often because, for example, if they play a move like bishop c2 here, then e5 is out of question. The queen is simply attacking it. So yeah, I hope this this maneuver makes a bit sense. I have a game later to show you that actually shows this maneuver with the bishop, and you'll actually get to see how I was able to attack my opponent on the king side. But I hope so far it makes sense.
Yeah. So far everything makes sense. I'm
Awesome.
I'm not as aggressive, but I'm working on it with the g5.
You'll get there.
I am
You'll
working
get
on
there.
it.
You'll get there. Oh, it's so confusing in chess.com. I was working in ChessBase and everything is there so neat, and here it's like just everything right behind each other, all the several lines. It's hard to navigate. But I think this covers everything regarding knight f6. It's not the best way to play here, but it's a fun line. It gives you fun ideas, possibilities, and yeah, from time to time I play this, and to this day, I mean, it's like it gets to +1 according to the engine, but I still, to this day, I feel like I get really nice positions and my opponents don't really know this line. So yeah, it can be pretty nice. So oh, sorry. Okay, so that's a knight f6. Now move on to c5. So after c5, it's very, I mean, there's 2 moves here. But yeah, the main move is e takes d5. And as you mentioned, people play, what do people typically play here against you?
They definitely have played that. E takes d5. I also think that over the board I faced knight f3.
Knight f3, okay.
I think.
Okay, yeah, that's also, I actually faced this recently OTP as well. So that's pretty funny. I actually don't think anyone ever played it against me, or I just played in such a way that I just transposed back to the main line in the terrace. But yeah, we can quickly go over knight f3 real quick. So after knight g f3, I mean, you have several moves here. I guess you can also play knight c6, but what is recommended here is that you take on d4. Do you remember if that's what you played, or you don't remember?
I believe that I played knight c6, then took after. And then white got an IQP in the end of it all.
Okay, I see. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, I recommend taking on d4. And okay, if they take on d5 now, then queen takes d5 and you transpose to the main line of the terrace. But what if they take on d4 with the knight? Now, this looks a bit different. It hardly looks like the French anywhere besides the pawns over here. But basically, you are supposed to play knight c6 here. And yeah, I mean, if they take on c6, you take back with the pawn, and you have a pretty solid pawn structure in the center. Your bishop can easily move to b7 at some point. And yeah, your pieces are free to move, and this knight is just blocking the bishop once again. It's not a big deal, but yeah, you would rather have the knight on c3, let's say.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is obviously not so great. So they first play bishop b5 to pin the knight and attack it one more time. And then you simply play bishop d7. You defend the knight, and you ask the opponent, like, okay, your knight is under attack. What do you do about it? Retreating is a bit silly, and yeah, you don't really want to trade. I mean, you can play move. I mean, you can play move like knight b3, I guess, but it just looks odd, and the pawn is hanging. So yeah, it doesn't look so great. So they typically take on c6, and after knight takes c6, you can take with the pawn, and we get back to this position we were just now. Bishop goes back to d3. And here it is important that you understand the structure. It's a bit different from the typical French. And it's also why during the game, I was a bit confused. I was like, this is not what I'm familiar with. I don't play such opening or something. So this is also one of the points that is important, that you need to adjust sometimes. The structure has changed. The pawn is not on d4 anymore, and it gives you certain opportunities, and it also may give your opponent certain opportunities. So what I was thinking about during the game is, okay, so what are the moves that my opponent is considering? Because it's a bit different from what I'm used to, and I need to adjust to this. And what I figured is that a move like e5 can be really annoying. Up to this point, it was not possible for white pretty much, because all the moves were forced. But if I don't do anything, if I play, for example, if I played a natural move like knight f6, you'll face e5.
Yeah.
And then you're forced to go back, which is a little bit disturbing. So that's when the idea arose of, okay, I have to stop this pawn from going to e5. Now you might think you can play e5 yourself, right? You can just play e5, and yeah, you're stopping your opponent from playing e5. But it is perhaps a little bit early, because you haven't developed any of your pieces yet, pretty much. Your opponent can play knight f3 and attack by tempo, and then develop the bishop. It is perhaps a bit early. And indeed, as someone in my chat, Black Death, is pointing out, bishop goes to d6. You're stopping your opponent from going e5 for the moment. The next move is probably queen c7, which is, I believe, also what I played in my game. And yeah, on the next move, you can already consider playing e5. And that's why the structure is so different from the French, because now that the pawn on d4 is gone, you can suddenly consider moves like e5, and also your pawn on d5 is defended.
Yeah, this is not like no. It's just not like anything I've played before. So
yes,
yeah.
I was sincerely surprised that about that has happened in the game, and I was very confused. So it took me quite some time to figure out what to do. But this is basically how, if something changes, how to adjust on it. It's basically you ask yourself, what does my opponent want? If I, for example, make a very natural move like knight f6, what does my opponent do? And then quickly you figure out that, okay, they want to play e5. It's really annoying, and it limits my moves a little bit. I don't want that. I want to keep the dark squares, alive for my bishop. I want to control them. And okay, by playing e5, you're stopping that from happening pretty much. But the plan is that you're controlling the center and you're gaining more space, because at the same time, you're opening this bishop. So yeah, it's basically the thought process that is important to note here, that once your opponent plays something else, you try to adjust to it, and then see, okay, what is my opponent's plan, and how do I react to it, or how do I deal with that? So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it definitely makes sense for sure.
Yeah, people typically don't really play this, so you might not face it many times. I've only faced this. Okay, maybe I don't recall my older games, but recently I've only seen this once, and I was surprised about this line. I don't know. I had no idea about this until I learned recently. So yeah, you might not see this very often, but typically they go for e takes d5.
Yes.
That's the main line. And are you familiar by any chance with e takes d5?
I'm not great with having an IQP, so
Okay.
I
Don't worry, I'm not recommending this. I'm just wondering.
um no, I don't really know much about this because I saw that we can get an IQP and I was like, oh, I'll just take with the queen. Um,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
mm,
I played this for the longest time in the first
mhm,
years I played the French because I thought the queen takes e5 is so boring and nothing going on. But yeah, I had some great games with this,
mhm.
but it's also just, as you mentioned, you have the isolated queen pawn at some point, and it's just not. I mean, it depends on your taste. Some people like to play with the isolated queen's
Yeah.
pawn, but in this very specific situation, the biggest problem for me is that, for example, let's play a few moves: knight gf3, knight
Hi, bye.
c6,
Thank you so
bishop
much for
d5, bishop
resubscribing. Thank you for the
d6,
6 months.
and well, basically they don't take on c5 until you move your bishop, because otherwise if you play knight f6 and they take, then you basically want to move. So that's pretty nice, but they don't do that. So that's why they wait for you to play bishop d6,
Yeah.
d takes, bishop takes, short castle. And I typically love playing the move 97. Well, I loved playing the move 97 here, because it feels a bit safer. Knight f6 is always under, there's always this threat of bishop g5 and it pins your knight, etc.
Yeah.
And after knight b3, bishop d6, and yeah, you have to like it if you want to play like this, or not, or you just don't like it. I had some nice games with it, but at some point I was just getting tired of getting checkmated myself, actually, because typically the idea is that if you have the isolated queen's pawn, you're the one attacking. You're the
Yeah.
one putting pressure on your opponent's king, and you're basically distracting them with this pawn. You are like, yeah, feel free to attack it. I'm going to focus on your king. But I got checkmated myself a few times. I don't know how, but it happens. And yeah, that was one of the reasons why I just stopped playing this line. It was not fun anymore. Yeah, that's why. I also wanted to say something about this. Don't recall what I wanted to say with this line. Yeah, I mean, okay, I can basically say that you have to like it or not, and yeah, if you don't like it, that's a very fair reason. It's much easier for white to play. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
On the bright side, French light square bishop is good. Yeah, I guess it is good. It kind of got to g4, f5, but that's about it. So yeah, that's about e takes d5. So instead, we go for queen takes d5. So typically they play knight gf3 here. They don't really mind losing the pawn because it's really hard for black to defend this pawn. Yes. So we just take here. I mean, it's a free pawn. Let's take it. They typically play bishop c4, attacking the queen and preparing to castle. And here, it's actually really funny that with the queen, you can go to many squares. I've played all three of queen d6, queen d7, and queen d8. I've played all three of them. But the main idea is the same. You just go to, well, you typically go to d6 and you want to go to c7 to attack the bishop and free the bishop to go to d6. The idea is the same. The execution was a bit different in all of those different lines, but queen d6 is the main move. So white plays short castle. And yeah, you might say like, hey, queen d6, it exposes yourself to move like knight e4. But fortunately for us, after knight e4, there's queen d4 check, and white loses a piece. So actually not losing because they can still defend, but it's wasting time, and yeah, it's not really recommended to go that road. So after queen d6, they typically play short castle, and now this check on b4 is just non-existent. So that's why knight e4 is actually kind of a threat. So we want to stop that. That's why we play knight f6.
Yeah.
So white plays the move knight b3. They want to recapture this pawn. And I'm curious how much you know about this line since you play it. Are you familiar with the position already or so far? Or is it just...
I don't think it ever... I don't know if I've had this specific position before. Not many people play the Tarash against me, to be honest. So I haven't had it that many times.
Okay.
So, I know you said that the queen goes to c7. I guess you
Yeah.
can gain a tempo on the bishop now.
Right. Yeah, the problem is that if you play queen c7, now they can take with the queen, and that might be a bit inconvenient.
That's true.
But
No,
okay, not
I
familiar
don't know
with
this
this.
position
I was just
at all.
curious. So yeah, the main move here is to play knight c6.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, they are going to take here. You might think, hey, I can play e5, and then I have a really strong center. I'm defending the pawn, I'm a pawn ahead. But there are some very, very big downsides to this. That first of all, your king hasn't castled yet, so you always have to look out for rook e1 type of moves. Fortunately, you can play bishop e7, but then you haven't solved the second problem just yet. A move like knight g5 might be really annoying.
Yes. This
And
looks scary.
f7 pawn is very exposed now. It's really hard to defend. If you have to resort to moves like bishop e6, I'm not sure if that's what you want when playing this opening.
No, it doesn't seem worth it for the pawn.
Yeah, so that's why you have to be really careful in the Taraj when playing e5. There are positions where it works, but most of the times you refrain from this because of this reason. Like, it's really hard to defend, and you're always under the pressure of moves like rook e1. So yeah, that's a big problem. Actually, they can still play rook e1, and after knight c6, they can actually take on d4 because it's pinned, and you don't have time to play bishop e7 because the pawn is hanging. So yeah, there's just so many problems here.
Yeah, I think I'll not do that.
Yeah. Good. So knight b3, and you simply defend with the knight. Well, defend, quote unquote, because you're losing the pawn. And they just take with the knight. It doesn't really matter which knight, but they always take with the b knight, just, because this knight is better placed than f3, but it doesn't really matter because the trade is going to happen anyways. And here white can either take with the queen or the knight. It doesn't really matter. I would personally, when playing with the black pieces, be really happy if they take with the queen, because I get to an end game and I can do whatever I want and it feels safer. But yeah, that's also one of the reasons why they typically don't play it. But in case they play this, it's okay to trade queens and then simply focus on developing the bishop, like a6, b5, bishop b7. And it already looks so much easier to play this because, you can develop your pieces easily. The queens are off the board, so your king is not in danger or anything like that. You can even consider playing, for example, your bishop gets out to d6 or c5, and you can put the king on e7. You don't even have to castle. It's maybe better to do so, but just in case you consider playing king e7, it might just be fine. It's playable. Typically in endgames, your king is, you want to have your king a bit involved. Maybe not with so many pieces on the board, but it's definitely not a very big problem to put your king on his e7 here. Definitely not. So yeah, that's if they take with a queen. If they take with a knight, as you probably saw just now, the idea is of whites that they want to play bishop b5 or knight b5, and that can get really annoying. So we played the move a6 just to stop any of that. We don't want to deal with this. And we also want to focus on developing our bishop, obviously. Yeah. So one of the main moves here is rook e1. And then you can simply play your move queen c7, because now there's no such thing as bishop b5. You're safe to do this. And after bishop b3, you just develop your bishop to d6. And after h3, because this was under attack, you simply short castle. And now you have a really nice position. Most of the pieces are developed. This bishop still needs to be developed, but it will get there soon, because b5, bishop b7, once again, is the idea. And later I'll show you another game in this opening that I recently played, how exactly the moves go. And I'll go a little bit in more depth regarding this situation here, because it can get, I wouldn't say tricky, but yeah, it's a little bit different from the French that we know with this pawn structure, because the center is pretty much gone. You only have the one pawn here. So it can be a bit different. It's a bit to get used to. But yeah, generally it's just developing your pieces and improving your position and developing the rooks either to d8, c8, or e8 and d8. whatever the position is asking from you.
Mm-hmm.
There are some little nuances to this position, but we'll get to that once we get to the games that I want to show you.
Mm-hmm.
So that basically covers everything regarding the towers that I want to show you. We saw two lines. We saw both knight f6, where we had this really interesting position where, first of all, we attack this pawn on d4, and then we have the right time here to take on d4 because we have a concrete plan. We want to play f6 before taking. We're not able to do that, and then after takes, we take with the queen. Knight f3, h6, and we have this idea of developing our pieces, and after short castle, bishop d6, knight g3, short castle, and we use this idea of playing rook f7. You can also play rook d8, but they typically play rook f7 to get to c7, and it's an open file, so it's like pretty useful to put your rook there. But you can also play rook d8 for the same idea, but rook f7, knight f8, bishop d7, bishop e8, rook c7, and bishop g6. That's the core idea in this position. We also saw just now the towers with c5, where after e takes c5, queen takes c5. And it's all pretty straightforward in the sense that you're responding pretty much to what your opponent does. You play queen d6, you go back here. It's just knowing that your opponent is going to capture this pawn d4 anyways. It's okay if they take it. Just make sure that your pieces are placed well. So after takes, you play 6, rook e1, and then this idea of queen c7 is important because it might otherwise be a little bit awkward to play. I guess bishop e7 is not actually it can get a bit tricky with certain moves like knight f5. I'm not 100% sure if it's working right here, but they typically play queen c7 because bishop d6 is a bit more active, and you get a bit more play like that. This queen is a little bit misplaced here, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So those are the main ideas, basically. You can go over the lines later on your own, at your own pace, because it might be a bit too much of information and a lot of different information as well to process. But so far, I hope it makes sense.
So far, I think I understand everything.
Awesome. All right, so we go to the next line. So we go to knight c3. I happen to know that you play bishop b4. Is there a reason that you play bishop b4 instead of, for example, knight f6?
I think I prepped bishop b4 with a friend for a game, and then I played it, and then I was having coaching with Irina Krush before the Olympiad, and she saw that I played it once, and she was like, "Okay, let's learn the winner." So then I had a couple of lessons specifically on the winner with her. So that's kind of it was just like I fell into it kind of thing.
Okay.
What do you play?
Makes perfect sense. So, me personally, what I started learning the winner were at the very first moment. But I don't think I actually ever played it OTB. But that was one of the first things I learned about the French. But what I didn't like is how much theory there is and how sharp it can get, and how the positions just feel uncomfortable to me. But there is this lines with queen g4 type of things, and I'm like, oh, please don't. I don't want to deal with that. And it can get very theoretical, and somehow I just couldn't deal with the structure. It was just not my thing. Maybe because it was like 10 years ago, but okay, still, I have never went back. Like, I never looked back anymore to bishop b4 because I feel comfortable with my lines. So I play knight f6. But yeah, bishop b4, it is definitely playable. Like, if you feel comfortable playing that, feel free to do so. But I'm going to show you some lines in knight f6. And
Sure.
you can give it a try if you want, or just stick to bishop b4. That's perfectly fine. But I'll show you knight f6 and what happens there, because I guess I'm not sure where it has, like, which line has more theory. I would say, from what I remember, bishop b4 was quite theoretical, so I really didn't like it. It didn't feel comfortable. Like, you have to play quite precisely, and that was not for me. So knight f6. Here you have to main moves, let's say. You have bishop g5 and e5. Obviously, they can still take on d5, but that's just the exchange variation.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at bishop g5. So bishop g5, the threat is clear, e5. It may not be a very dangerous threat because I'm not sure if you have heard of the McCutcheon.
No.
No, okay, it's bishop b4. I don't recall the exact lines, but it brings me a little bit back to the win hour, and it's not the same, I think, but it's like pretty sharp, and it can get a bit tactical, a bit complicated. I played it very few times when I was a bit tired of my own lines, but yeah, that is, I guess, a bit towards the win hour, but it can get quite sharp, and yeah, maybe a bit too much to deal with. At least for me, it is. So yeah, I play d takes e4 here simply. White takes with the knight. Knight takes e4, and here we have two main moves basically. You can either play knight b to d7, or you can play bishop e7. And generally, I believe the main move, or one of the main moves, I mean, it's obviously one of the main moves, but I'm not sure if this was more popular, not bishop e7. What I don't like about this myself is that bishop takes f6 is a move here, and they sometimes tend to take with the pawn. Like pawn takes is played pretty much. Bishop takes is obviously also played, but the problem with bishop f6 in these type of positions is that the knights can get really annoying. Typically, black castles short, and white can get a huge attack going on here, and it gets really terrifying because the knights are really tricky. And with the knight on e4, it can jump to g5 at any point, and it just feels very uncomfortable, which is one of the reasons why they sometimes take with the pawn. But then you're already ruined your pawn structure, and I'm like, yeah, why would I do this to myself? So I think at the top level, people play this. I don't know if it's still the case these days. I haven't followed that very closely, but it is played and playable, but you have to like it, and I don't see why I should like it. So I don't really play this. I also would not recommend this because it would just give you so much headache. Like, you have the pair of bishops, sure, but it's not like you're gonna develop those pieces really soon, really fast, and your opponent also has a lot of play still. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's enough, and not enough for my liking, that for sure. So that's why after knight takes e4, I play knight b d7. If they take now with the bishop, which is obviously not necessary at all, but if they take, then I take with the knight. And then after knight takes, I take with the queen. And that's a complete different story. Now I have the pair of bishops, and I have a nice pawn structure, and yeah, it looks a bit nicer than what we saw previously.
Yeah, definitely.
So, they typically play knight f3 here, simply to develop a piece. And the main move here is h6, because typically they don't really mind that there's a capture happening here, and they want to kick the bishop out of here. One of the main moves here is c5. After this, all sorts of moves here. But sorry, I got a bit confused here with the lines here. It's a big mess. But yeah, the main line is knight takes f6, knight takes f6, and the bishop h4, as I said, c5. c5 is one of the main moves. It's the main move in so many lines in the French because of this pawn on d4. And if you can capture a pawn in the center with one of your c or f pawns, typically c pawns preferable, it's pretty good. You want to control the center as much as possible. So yeah, c5 is a very logical move here. And after bishop b5 check, it might seem a bit scary because, well, your king is exposed, and now you don't have the move c6 anymore, but you simply play bishop d7. And after bishop d7, they typically take, and here queen takes d7. And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this position. It feels like white has more control over the position, and it's not too bad, but it's just a personal taste. I'm not really a huge fan of this. We're not too worried about bishop takes f6. It might seem a bit worrying because, yeah, we ruin our pawn structure once again. But this time, the bishop has a clear path. I mean, it can go to d6 pretty easily. The g file is open, so we have some play here. This is a big drawback that the pawns are very weak, but the upside of this is that we still have a lot of play here. So yeah, this is one of the main lines, but personally I prefer to play let me see where that is. Oh god, yeah, here, bishop e7. Bishop e7, I'm forcing white to do something about this knight. I want this knight to move, and whether that is going back or taking, I don't mind either, because I'm happy with both. If they take on f6, so basically just quickly, if they go back, that is first of all not great, because you'll just simply continue your plan with c5. So if they go back, that's not great and you'll have a great position. But that's why they typically take on f6. I take back with the bishop because I want the bishops to be traded off. And after bishop takes f6, queen takes f6. And yeah, you have a pretty nice position here. You still need to develop this bishop, which might be a little bit difficult at times, but the idea is very simple. You want to go short castle? Play c5. Once again, do you want to play c5? But you have to be a bit careful with your king, which is why I recommend going short castle first, just to make sure your king is safe. There's nothing going on with any bishop b5 sort of moves. And then you can safely consider playing c5 and continue your plan. The bishop you would ideally want to put on b7. Sometimes they play bishop d7, bishop c6, but you have to look out for knight e5 type of moves. So ideally you would want to get your bishop on b7, but you have to see how the position develops and if you're able to play b6, because one of the tricks in this position, let me show you real quick. It's white to move bishop d3, short castle. Let's say I play c5. Oh no, queen 2 first. And if you play b6 here, do you see the problem?
Is it bishop b5?
Bishop b5 is a typical move that can be really annoying because there's a lot of pressure on this knight. But there's one move here that is simply destroying black's position.
Is it just getting the...
Take your time. So basically, because of b6, you weakened quite a lot of things. And there are certain things that are pretty exposed now, and you have to make use of them with the white pieces. How can you make use of those?
Oh, I see. There's a fork with...
Yes.
Yeah, with threatening mate on h7 and the rook on a8 with the queen.
Right, queen e4, yeah. This is a very typical trap in those kind of lines. That's why you need to be careful with playing b6. And it might... I've actually fell for this myself many times. I'm guilty of this, so it's... I mean, you have to know it, of course, and you have to be prepared for it, but it might just happen, and it's quite annoying. But in order to prevent this, so yeah, this might just happen that they play queen e2 here. In order to prevent this, I guess, well, first of all, you just don't play b6. You wait for it. But I guess simply playing c5 already solves so much. There's one more line I actually want to show you after c5 because it can get pretty tricky. Just trying to figure out. Okay, so imagine if they defend by playing c3. They take on we take on d4. Knight takes d4, and you feel like knight c5. I want to play that because I attack the bishop and I free some space for my bishop. Maybe I can play bishop b6, bishop b7 finally. But do you see what the problem is with knight c5?
If bishop takes h7 check, king takes, queen h5 picks the knight back up, and you win a pawn, and the king is exposed.
Right, very good, very good. Yeah, I see someone in chat saying queen h5, which I was also considering, but sadly you're losing the bishop right away, so that doesn't work. And that's why sometimes you have to make use of this rule called, you have to change the move order. You have to swap it. And that's why, since you know that queen h5 is not working, you can try to consider, okay, what if I swap the move order? I just start with bishop takes h7. They're not going to take my bishop now. They will, but they will lose the knight. So indeed, queen h5 check. And I think if you look at my games on chess.com, you'll find many games where I fell for this trap. I don't know why I still fall for this, for this trap, but... it's just so not obvious. Like knight c5 is the most obvious move in the position, and then I just fall for it again over and over again. So yeah, this is simply losing a pawn, and it's not the end of the end of the end, but a pawn is pretty costly and it might be a bit annoying. But I guess you still have some counterplay, like e5, bishop gets out. It's not the end of the world, but it's not fun to be pawn down.
No.
So yeah, that's why it's really important that that you know about these kind of tricks. It might just happen. It still happens to me. It's one of the reasons sometimes I'm like, I know knight c5 is bad, I'll play knight e5 instead, because I know that's what's gonna happen after knight c5, and knight e5 is pretty decent. I guess you also have moves like e5 at this point, like that also actually covers a lot, because then you can actually play knight c5 without losing the knight anymore. So yeah, that covers that. Where were we? So we deviated quite a bit. Yeah, so later, this is a different line. Yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. Bishop e7. Oh yeah, takes. And then instead of bishop takes, they also tend to play h4.
Okay.
With the idea that they're gonna attack you on the king side. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But it's still very annoying to deal with. Basically, you want a short castle, but yeah, you can probably guess there will be a pawn storm, and you cannot take this bishop. You can, but you'll open up the h file. This king is never gonna go short castle. It will always, it goes almost always long castle, which is really annoying to deal with. Because the attack can be pretty huge, but that's why we don't take on g5. So we play h6. We simply ask the bishop to leave kindly, and after bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, queen d2 is pretty logical because they want to go long castle. And here you can play short castle, you can play c5. I played c5 in my game that I will later show you. But yeah, short castle is also just fine. You want to play c5. I had certain reasons here. I didn't want to deal with g4 just yet. G4 just yet here, which is why I wanted to play c5 first. But yeah, both work just fine. Playing c5 or short castle. But I'll show you later what happened in my game when I played c5. Okay. So yeah, that's about this line. After bishop g5. As you can probably see, it is a little bit boring. It's not too interesting. Maybe I'll consider playing bishop b4 at some point. You also have bishop e7, but that's a complete different story. I actually don't really know the theory regarding that, but I may have played this a few times. But yeah, there's definitely lots of moves to consider here besides d takes e4. Okay, not too many because there's a big threat going on. But yeah, d takes e4 may be a little bit dry. It may be a bit boring, but yeah, I have some nice games, and I think, you know, maybe after the game I'll be able to convince you that the line can be pretty funny. It can get really interesting, and there's some ideas that might be interesting to know. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks more intuitive than the 1 hour.
Yeah, sure. yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like the moves seem more natural. I would agree.
Yeah, and I think it's also part of the reason why I prefer this than going with the 1 hour, because it's so concrete and yeah, it's kind of get pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So this feels like a bit closer to, you know, just playing random, like, I mean, random, just normal moves, just very moves, natural. Yeah. So yeah, that's bishop g5. Now let's have a look at e5. So they can play e5 here. We always go to d7, as we saw earlier. And as I mentioned at the start, white's idea is to play f4, f5. Oh, that's not f4, f4, f5. And that's what they're going for here. And we counter with c5. They play knight f3, knight c6. This is all pretty standard. You just put pressure on the pawn and you develop knight f3, knight c6. Bishop e3. They are simply developing another piece. And here it can get pretty interesting. So there are quite a few moves here that black can play. There's c takes e4, there's bishop e7, a6, queen b6. I believe back when I started studying the French, I don't recall c takes e4 being a move, or at least it was not being taught to me. And recently it seems to be more popular to take on d4. But okay, we'll cover some of the lines here and very briefly. But c takes e4 is very much playable.
Okay.
But I'll show you something interesting here, because so let's have a look at bishop e7. So when I first started playing this line, this was the first one of the first moves I learned together with queen b6. But what I want to illustrate here is that after queen d2, short castle, you might think, hey, my opponent did short castle. I want to attack on the king side. I'll do long castle because my king is safe there, and I want to focus on attacking and, you know, playing bishop d3 and all sorts of moves. f5 is also in the air, but long castle is actually not the greatest move. Do you know why long castle is not so great?
Well, I guess we've already started attacking on the queen side.
How would you do that?
Can you play... If this was a blitz game, I would play like a5 and stuff.
Okay.
So I guess you also want to try and prep b5, b4. So I guess you could... Oh, I'm not sure the best way to do that.
That's okay, no worries. So yeah, you have the correct idea. But what is really important here is that you still have a pawn on c5. And the nice part about the pawn being still on c5 is that you can push it. Yes. And you close this whole centered, I mean, almost, yeah, you close this down pretty much, this pawn structure. You are not allowing the bishop to go to d3. You're cutting off this bishop absolutely from, you know, the square b5. And this also opens up the bishop. You are basically giving yourself many, many opportunities here. And the nice part about this as well, so you're locking down this whole center and you're basically very much ahead in the attack because your pawn is all the way to c4 already. And there's a pawn f4 here, but I mean, I guess you can play f5, but it doesn't really do much. This f5 move is not doing much. Black is basically first with the attack. And the reason why is because you're going to play b5 right away. You're not going to prepare it. I mean, this is your preparation. Because imagine they play, I guess, g4. You play b5. And suddenly the attack becomes very, very strong and very fast. And it has mainly to do with the fact that this knight is on c3. We are threatening to attack it. And if they take here, we're more than happy to give them this pawn because it opens up the b file. We can easily put a queen on b6, rook b8, and start attacking on the pawn on b2. For example, let's say you play rook b8. The knight has to leave pretty much. You can try playing a4, but I'll just kick you out of there. So let's say they go back. And then you can already start thinking about moves like, I mean, not right now, but there are potential ideas. Imagine if your queen is on b6 and then you get to play bishop a3. That seems pretty dangerous because of the b takes a3. There's already a checkmate on b2. So because of the pawn being gone now, you can easily attack on the queen side and all your pieces are there. Specifically this knight, the bishop, queen, and rook. And that's quite a lot of heavy pieces. And it's a little bit difficult to see how white can defend. The best defense is pretty much to run away. And that's not a good sign. If you long castle and then suddenly you have to run away all the way to the king side, that's not a great sign. So that's why c4 is so important. It stops white from defending, from dealing with the situation well, especially because we get to play b5 so fast. And after knight takes b5, there are many consequences for white rather than for us. Like we are pawn down, but we have such great attack. So that's why long castle is not great at all. And this, you might say, okay, so this means nobody ever plays this, right? People play this. And that's why bishop e7 is not so great anymore these days, or queen b6, that you can play both moves pretty much. They're perfectly fine. Even if the queen is on b6, so let's say you don't do short castle, you play queen b6, even here, this is bad. You play c4 and your attack is still very, very strong. I had a game, it was one of my first games in the French, and my opponent went for a long castle, and I was so happy because I knew that it was bad, and I played c4 pretty quickly, and I had a really nice attack. I tried to find the game back, but because it was so long ago, it was actually 2011. I was like, okay, I don't know where to find that game. It's nowhere to be found on the internet. So it's a bit sad, but it was a really nice attacking game where at some point the king ran away all the way this side, the king side, because it was just getting checkmated otherwise. And I managed to win that game in the end, but it was pretty cool. And it would have been nice to illustrate this because obviously this line, first of all, doesn't happen so much. I mean, this very specific line, and especially long castle, it rarely happens. But I've had a few online games where they just long castle and then it just goes really fast, you know, this whole attack. It's a bit sad to have the queen on b6 because now you cannot play b5 so easily, but you can always play queen a5 and then play b5. That's not a big deal. But yeah, that's why I wanted to illustrate with bishop e7 that it can go really fast if they're not careful. So c4 is really important. And for that reason, so if we switch to the main move here, a6, it's simply preparing b5 and you're launching the attack pretty much straightforward. And then they play queen d2. And here we play b5. And now it's just so much more obvious for white to deal with the problem of c4. Because now it's super obvious that white takes on c5. And now suddenly the c4 move is not there anymore and the attack is not so huge anymore because white can easily defend. It's actually crazy that this pawn, when it gets to c4, makes such a big difference. But for this reason, they take on c5. And I mean, if you're in this position with the white pieces, I don't think you'll go long castle that easily, which is also why you want to be a little bit sneaky. So sometimes I play bishop e7, sometimes I play queen b6. I switch around a little bit, but especially when I play against strong players, I just go like this. I mean, it's pretty obvious that they know that they have to take the pawn. So in the other position, they also had to take the pawn on c5. So yeah, d takes c5, bishop takes c5. You just take with the bishop. You can also take with a knight, but I would say bishop takes feels more natural because you're developing a piece. They typically trade. There's also lines where they don't trade and just play passively, but you'll just develop your pieces. You'll continue with your idea to play short castle, and you always have the move f6 in the air. So that's really important to look out for. So bishop takes c5 is the main move, knight takes c5. They typically play queen f2 to attack your knight, and that's a little bit annoying, but we defended with the queen b6. And after bishop d3, I have a question for you. It's the main move pretty much. What would you do here if you were playing with the black pieces?
I would be tempted to take on d3 and then trade queens, but I don't know if it's good or not.
Yeah, and it's really tempting. It's really tempting.
I guess there's also maybe knight b4.
Yeah, those are pretty much, those are the main moves pretty much. I mean, it's very tempting to attack and take that bishop because, well, it's a very strong piece, and it's always nice to be able to take the bishop with the knight, especially because it's check as well. However, there are a few important points in this position. So we know that we have the light squared bishop on c8, and it's not the greatest. It is pretty much locked in this cage over here. It doesn't really do much. I mean, maybe at a later stage of the game, you might be able to activate it. But if you play knight takes d3, they take back. And let's say we trade queens, it becomes pretty obvious that this bishop is not really doing much.
Yeah,
and soon white will play d4 and just lock your cage even further. And it might be really difficult to deal with the knights. They're pretty strong. It's quite a close position. So your bishop is not going to be able to do much. And even if it somehow gets out of here, for example, we get to play b4, a5, bishop a6, and we get to go around the board pretty much, it is still, and not the greatest. It's pretty dubious, and the knights can jump around so easily. And you might think, okay, I can play d4 myself then to open up this diagonal for the bishop. But then your pawn gets really weak, and you also allow the knight to jump to e4. So there's so many problems here for black, which is why it's not so great to take the bishop. And they typically just let the bishop stay there. You want to keep the bishop there so you can trade it with your own bishop. So that, you get a more balanced position and you don't have this problem with your light squared bishop. I mean, it can be the hero of the game sometimes, but in this particular situation, we're better off trading it. So knowing this idea, what would you play here instead?
Maybe you can play b4.
Yeah, b4 is great. You attack the knight has to leave. It doesn't really have many squares. They go to e2 typically. And then we play the move a5. And we're simply preparing bishop a6. And I believe this is also what I mentioned in some other line, that this is a typical idea. You want to play b4, a5, and then bishop a6 to develop the bishop, but also just simply offer the trade. And they cannot avoid it. I mean, white's to move first, short castle, and then bishop a6. And they cannot avoid it. It's just impossible. And we keep our knights. They're pretty strong. And once this bishop is off the board, let's say bishop a takes a6, we can only capture back with the rook because the knight is pinned, because the queen is attacking b6. And queen takes a6 obviously hangs the knight on c5. So rook takes a6 is the only move pretty much. And now we can see that our knight has access to the square e4. We can safely play it in the next few moves. We can also see that, I mean, white is getting the square d4, but it is not doing much there. The square e4 feels more important, which is why they might play a move like knight g3, but then you simply continue with moves like short castle, f6, try to pinch this pawn on e5, and try to create some play in the center for yourself. Those pawns can become quite weak. So that's what you're playing for pretty much. You can, I mean, I guess you also have a lot of space on the queen side, but it's a bit hard to see how you can exactly make use of that, because ideally in the French, the c4 square can be quite important, but it might be a bit of a stretch to try to go for a4, knight a5, knight c4. It might be a bit too much, and yeah, you have to deal with other things first, like short castle and f6. Those are more important, but it's always nice to have this in your mind that you can perhaps play a4 if you're out of plans, you have no moves anymore to play. You can always play a4, knight a5, and so on. It's also fine to trade queens, obviously. I mean, especially if you get to e4, you can also get your knight to a4, but it may not be the greatest square to go to, but at least you're attacking the pawn there. But generally, you're fine trading off the queens. I mean, yeah, you're fine going into the end game, and white could maybe start attacking with queen g3, you know, and you never know what's going to happen with f5. So you have to be a bit careful, which is why short castle f6 is a really good idea to start with.
Yeah, I think I would be happy to trade the queens as well.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you also have to be careful of f5, as mentioned in the chat. f5 is something to be aware of. But one of the downsides, I mean, first of all, you can always take. I mean, right now you can take, but in case white is able to recapture that pawn somehow, the pawn on e5 is weak. So you could play against that. You can, if once you get a knight on e6, it will be very difficult for white to attack even further. So yeah, it's a bit difficult here for white to attack. They have to play pretty precise here, and the precise moves are not really involving an attack. So yeah, that's regarding this line. Let me see if I missed anything. Oh god, it's such a mess. It looks better in chess-base. Do you have chess-base by any chance?
I have chess-base reader. I honestly have never used chess-base.
Okay.
Do you think I should use chess-base? I've heard like some people love it, and then some people are like, you don't really need it. So I don't know. I just never bothered.
It depends. I guess people typically use it, but I have to be honest with you. When I started streaming, I was not doing anything regarding opening. I don't think ever since I started streaming, I've only touched it a few times for opening prep, for potential lessons like this one. That's the only times I touched it. So I never really needed it otherwise. So it really depends. For opening prep, I guess it's nice to be able to run an engine, but you can also like use analysis tools online. There's plenty of them, like on chess.com as well. So it's not really that much of importance, you know. Yeah. But it's always nice to. I guess it's nice to have it. If you have it, it's nice. But if you don't have it, it's not like I'm forcing you to get it or something. It's not like a must, but it's pretty nice. Okay. But it's also quite expensive. It is a bit expensive. So yeah, if you don't really use it so much, it might not be worth it.
No, I know it has databases in it as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe if I get super serious about opening prep, maybe I will.
Right. Yeah. I think for the timing, you're just fine using online tools. Like whatever you're using it's perfectly fine. Yeah.
I'm really sorry about my background noise, by the way. There's like I'm really sorry about my background noise, by the way.
I don't hear it actually.
Really?
I saw it and I was like, what? Huh?
I know my stream can hear it, I think. I'm just getting stressed about it because there's like construction going on next door and stuff.
Oh, that's so annoying.
Yeah. But it's if you can't hear it, that's the main thing. That's fine.
Yeah, I think there's a nice noise suppression or noise canceling thing on Zoom. So no, I don't hear anything, but don't worry about it. Don't worry. As long as it doesn't distract you so much.
No.
Okay. I think this covers Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, we went through e5. Yeah, I think we went through the main moves in this line.
Yeah.
So yeah, we first discussed that after bishop g5, we're fine with taking. Knight bd7 is the main move. Knight f3, and here my recommendation, I mean, that's what I personally love to play, is bishop e7. Knight takes, bishop takes. If they take with a bishop, I'm happy to take back with the queen, and I have a nice position. I play c5 and short castle. And I figure out how to develop my bishop without losing material. That's really important. And if they play h4, we play h6. We kick the bishop out of there. If they take queen d2, we simply play either c5 or short castle. I'll show you a game soon about this. And then we discussed, what about e5? Knight fd7, f4, c5. This is all very self-explanatory. Once you see it, bishop e3. And here I show you that after bishop e7, so let's say here, you can trick them by playing short castle and then make them feel like they are supposed to play long castle, and then c4. We play c4 and shut down everything in the center and go for the attack right away. You can also just, you can switch around the moves with bishop e7, queen b6. It comes down to the same thing, but you can also play a6. And after a6, we play queen d2, b5, and now they feel the need to take on c5 pretty much. Bishop takes, knight takes, queen f2, queen b6, and after bishop d3, we do not take the bishop. We're gonna trade it with our own bishop on c8. So we play b4, a5, short castle, and then bishop a6. And yeah, that's about knight f6. That's the classical variation in the French. And this pretty much covers everything regarding knight c3. I mean, without the winner, obviously.
Yeah.
There's obviously very small lines that barely ever happen. I mean, they can take on d5, but just the French exchange. And one thing I want to say about the French exchange, maybe we'll look into that right now very briefly.
Yeah.
So after d5, they can take on d5 right away. E takes d5, and typically, from my own experience, I like playing the French exchange because it gives you an open position. It is pretty balanced, pretty even, and you're not worse. I mean, okay, you're not the one moving first, I guess. That's the only downside, but you're not the one that is worse. Whereas typically white wants to fight for an advantage and black is fighting for equality. So how do you personally feel about the exchange variation?
I had a couple of different ones at the Olympiad in the exchange, actually, because it's what everybody was playing. And so I looked at quite a lot of different lines, and I can't say I enjoy them in particular.
I had
one,
is, I guess, very strong word, it's not very enjoyable. I get what
I had
you're
one with c4, which I guess was the most specific of all of them. Yeah.
Right. That's actually also what I personally play with white pieces, and everyone is scolding me for playing it. They're like, why are you playing this? It's so bad. And why do you, you play against the French and then you play this? But it can get pretty tricky. You need to be careful. I've played in OTB Rapid or Blitz sometimes where I would play against a strong opponent and they would just simply somehow allow me to, after knight f6, bishop g5, and not exactly like that, but the position would be like bishop g5 and I get to take on d5 and I'm a pawn up or something. So it can go really wrong if you don't know what you're doing. But generally the idea is simple, that you want to develop. And it's basically the same position we were looking at earlier in the Tarrasch, when instead of queen takes d5, we took with the pawn, but the colors are reversed. And this time you might be playing against isolated queen's pawn. And I typically don't really face this with black pieces. Nobody really plays this. So I just develop and simply do whatever. Knight f6, bishop e7, maybe even bishop b4. But what is often really recommended is a move like knight c6. I don't really play this myself. I'm a bit guilty of that. Maybe I should. It just looks very ugly. We all know putting the knight in front of the c pawn is not really recommended at times. But the idea is very straightforward. That, okay, imagine knight f3, knight f6, and they play bishop d3. We get to play knight b4. And I remember some time ago, I fell for this a few times that I didn't know what to do. And my bishop was just struggling and I couldn't do anything. Also, your pawn is really well defended. You can always drop back to d5 with this knight. And black has a really nice sort of, I mean, maybe not advantage, but like a slight edge, you know, the activity is really nice of black. You get to play bishop g4. There's all sorts of moves there. So I guess what I can recommend after c4 is try out the move knight c6 and see what happens, because you're putting so much pressure on this pawn. And it's a bit difficult to play here for white. White needs to be very passive because, yeah, if you cannot play bishop d3, then you have to resort to bishop e2. And that's pretty passive. That means we get to play bishop f5 ourselves and so on. So yeah, typically in the exchange variation, it's that the stronger player wins, which is why if I play against someone that's weaker than me, then I feel quite confident. I try to get initiative. I try to play very actively. I try to play knight f6, bishop g4, or maybe I play, for example, what I typically play. So let's assume knight f3 happens. I typically play bishop d6, bishop d3, knight e7, after short castle. Now the rook e1, bishop f5 works fine. I also play c6. You cannot play bishop g4, sadly, because of the Greek gift kind of tactic. So you have to be careful with that. But once you play move like h6, bishop g4 works just fine. But okay, bishop f5 is also perfectly fine here. But the main idea is what I typically go for is I develop my pieces. I put my bishop, okay, let's say f5, c6, knight d7. I maybe go to f6, stuff like that. You can also consider going for knight f6 and try to control the e4 square somehow. But I don't really like going for this as much because you're pretty much moved down. So every idea that you have in a symmetrical position is what your opponent also has. So that's a bit tricky. And that's why I prefer to play move like knight e7. I play bishop f5 and so on. I just play whatever I feel like, honestly. Yeah.
And I had this exact like line over the board in the Olympiad, and she traded everything and we drew.
Yeah, it's a bit annoying. I definitely understand it can be a bit annoying. That's why I try to find some imbalances, like try to create them. When they play, for example, rook e1. Okay, did you have this position with bishop f5?
Yes.
Okay, you had this. Okay.
Yeah.
So you try to change it up a little bit. So here, instead of playing rook e8, I play bishop f5, for example. And after takes, I try to create some play. I try to scare my opponent that they have to resort to other moves rather than just trading everything. So because your knight is on f5, you want to consider moves like, I don't know, queen f6, queen g6, and try to start something. And if anything, you can also play c5. I know you don't like playing with the queen's isolated queen's pawn. But yeah, it can be interesting. But you can also just play c6, queen c7. That's another way of dealing with the position. But yeah, it can get pretty dry. I also recently had a game in this line. I did not expect the exchange variation to be played, but for some reason she wanted to go for this. And for the longest time, it was very, very equal. I tried to squeeze everything I could. And then I had a brilliant move, but it was so equal that the brilliant move was not doing anything. It was just a cool move. And that's it. But typically the stronger player is ahead here. And it's strange to say because it's so equal, but it's those tiny details that are going to matter in equal positions. And it sucks to have to deal with this as, you know, you play the French and You don't really want to go for such lines where it's that equal. But on the other hand, we're playing with black pieces. So if our opponent really wants to go for that draw and doesn't want to do anything interesting, then yeah, sometimes we just have to accept it. Yeah, so that makes it a bit rough. It's all white got first move advantage, exactly. And yeah, that has both its ups and downs. Like you want to play a bit more interesting game, but it's another task, another skill to make it interesting out of a boring position. So I think what I can give to you from this is try to play actively, try to create some play here where sometimes maybe it's okay to resort to moves like c5. It's not ideal, but what I like more about this position compared to in the Tarrasch is that this knight is not developed yet, this bishop is not developed yet, and your pieces are developed. Like you've already castled, the knight's on f5, bishop d6, the knight gets out on c6 pretty soon, and it's pretty much easier to play than in the Tarrasch. I mean, it was relatively easy to play, but I would say this position is much easier.
Yeah, I find white can get a lot of activity in the Tarrasch very quickly.
Yeah,
whereas this doesn't feel too scary.
Yeah, exactly. So c5 could be a move to consider if you really want to spice it up a little bit and create some imbalance. So it might be a bit risky because, yeah, you're allowing yourself to have an isolated queen's pawn. But at the same time, maybe that's exactly what your opponent is going to be struggling against, because it's actually funny because recently in the European Women's Chess Championship, it was not the same opening, but it was the same idea. I saw that my opponent just lost every single game in the same tournament against isolated queen's pawn. So I was like, whatever happens, I'm going for this. So I saw some line, it was against d4, and it was the exact, okay, I did not get exact same position, but it was almost getting there. And I was really confident about my position because I thought, okay, she's getting checkmated every time. When she faces the isolated queen's pawn, there was bishop takes h3 kind of ideas all the time. So I was really confident about this. In the end, the position was a bit different. I was not able to like create some nice attack on the king side, but I felt very confident. And I guess it also depends on every single opponent. Like maybe this person is, a big favorite in these type of positions. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're absolutely clueless. And I guess what matters the most is that you know what you're doing, as long as you're not trying to trade pieces with the black pieces here, because once you get to the end game, the pawn d5 gets really weak.
Yeah, no, I have Anish Giri's French course on Chessable.
Oh, yeah.
It got to like my third or fourth exchange French in the Olympiad, and I was like, I need something else. And so I was really prepared to play c5 almost immediately.
Yeah.
In the exchange, and then my opponent played a Tarrasch.
Oh, wow.
So that was all my prep out the window.
Wow. Yeah, that happens. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of different lines in the French, and sometimes it's nice. That's why I'm trying to give you some options as well, so that if they do something like, they change it up, then you can also change it up. And as I said, in Tarrasch, you can play knight f6 or you can play c5, whatever you feel like, whatever feels comfortable for you. And yeah, I also personally, as I have played so many French games, at some point people know what I'm doing. So I try to have 3 options at some point or something, or maybe even more. So they don't really know what to expect, and I'm a bit unpredictable, but yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I know that Anish, I believe Anish recommends a Winnower, right?
I don't know. I've only looked at the exchange chapter, to be honest.
I remember I was so happy with doing the French, and I was like, bishop b4, really? He's not covering any of 96? At least that's what I remember. I don't know if it's changed or something, but I was really upset. So I didn't get the course, but it would have been awesome. But this is regarding the exchange variation. There's only so much you can say about it. And Yeah, it's just what it is. If people want to go for that, then sure, we take it. If you're the stronger player, you'll outplay them. If they are stronger, then we're happy with the equality. We're happy with it, and we're just gonna play solid chess. And yeah, if everything is being traded, then so be it. Okay, so now we have one more line left.
Yes.
Quite an important one. Defense variation. Just very briefly, what the moves are. How familiar are you in the advanced variation?
I'm okay for the first like 5 moves.
I mean, that's a great start.
So I play c5,
Yeah.
knight c6, queen b6, bishop d7 kind of thing. And then
okay,
don't really know any
cool.
theory.
Okay. So for the longest time, I was myself playing queen b6. First knight f3, queen b6. And what I didn't really like about this line is that after a3, they typically recommend you to play knight h6. And I hated this so much.
I don't like when they take on h6.
Yes, at some point they take on h6 and you're like, why did I do this to myself? And obviously, like, I mean, grandmasters are okay with it and they can play this position perfectly fine. But to me, it's like I'm destroying my pawn structure permanently. This will never be solved. And a miracle should happen for me to be okay with this. So that's when I started to navigate and like explore a bit more options, because I did not like this. And I found this nice idea of playing bishop d7. I think it was suggested by Simon Williams. And he basically covered this line very briefly. And yeah, it was very nice to me. Bishop d7. And yeah, there's a few moves here. Obviously, if they play a3 now, the nice part about playing bishop d7 first is that you get to play f6 now. So we're not going to focus on the knight maneuvering to f5 somehow. We're going to play f6. And this looks a bit similar to the line we saw earlier. It was the Tarish, but then with knight f6, remember? So after e takes, knight takes f6. We don't take with the queen this time, because now bishop g5 is actually really scary. So we are forced to take with the knight pretty much. But look at how nice our development is. b4, if they play b4, which is why they play a3, we take on d4, c takes d4, and bishop d6. And look how nice our development is. We have 4 pieces developed. We're about to castle. And the queen, I mean, it can go to b6, it can go to c7, e7. You can, try out whatever you like. But why does only develop the knight? They wasted so much time on playing a3 and b4. And at what cost? I mean, they get to play knight c3, I guess, at some point, but it doesn't really mean much. And we have a really nice development. So that's why this line is so great. And this is why you want to play f6 now. There's no big things happening here. It's the perfect time to play f6 as you get so much development. And it's the right time because you want to kind of decide where you put this bishop. And yeah, you cannot sadly put 2 pieces on the same square. Ideally, you want to play knight e7, knight f5, because yeah, we don't want to deal with that. But you cannot put 2 pieces on the same square. So that's why we go for f6. And yeah, we just get a really nice position. Where does the knight go if they play b5? We're fine if they play b5. Let's say, okay, bishop d6, b5. We're fine to go to a5. So one of the main things in the French as well is not only is the square e4 important, c4 is also important. And the winnower is one of the few lines, I think, where c4 becomes of huge importance, because you get to play rook c8, you can drop the knight to c4, and the b5 pawn might become a little bit weak. So white has to be really careful with that. Typically, sometimes black plays a5, and then typically white gets to play b5, and then it becomes a different story, because then we cannot go to a5 anymore with our knight. We have to retreat, and the position becomes a little bit sloppy for us on the queen side. It's not so favorable anymore. I'm guilty of myself for playing a5 a few times and then facing b5. So basically, if they play bishop d3, a5, b5, and knight a7, it looks very sad. They play a4, and my whole queen side is just fixed, and it's not for the good. It's not at all, because my bishop is really sad. My knight is pretty sad. I guess I can maneuver, but it's so much time that I'm wasting here. So yeah, just to illustrate that, if we play a5, then b5 is great. But as long as we don't play a5, if white plays b5, we're more than happy to face this and go to a5 with our knight. And c4 becomes a really nice square for our knight. And yeah, that's once again about the pawn structure, right? Basically, you see how the pawns are on e6 and d5, and it's basically telling you like, okay, there's no pawn on, anywhere here, which means that those squares are really nice. Our pawn is defending those squares, and the opponent can't really attack it with the pawns. That means those squares are really important. And yeah, that's why, especially in the win hour, we are happy to go to c4. So that's regarding a3 here. Now, what if they do a move like bishop e2? Just very normal, very straightforward. We are going to play knight g7. We're not going to play knight h6. Hell no. We are moving on from that. So we're not really afraid of them taking on c5 because it weakens e5 so much. And if e5 is lost, we have a brilliant center. And that's the beauty part of the French. Once white center is destroyed, we have a really nice center ourselves. And it is quite hard to deal with that for whites. It's pretty difficult. So knight g6, and this is not, it's impossible to defend. I guess you have lines like before you try to create some play on the queen side and defend the pawn c5, but it's not worth it. Not for this pawn. Definitely not. You can always face, you can always counter it with a5. So yeah, not really worth it. This is why they typically play knight a3, because they realize that, okay, my opponent's not going to take on d4. We're not taking on d4 just like that. And they have to find some square for this knight somehow. They typically go to c2 so they can defend the pawn d4. This pawn d4 in the advanced variation is a huge target because it's quite easy for us to attack it with queen b6, knight f5, and so forth. Often it's actually pretty crazy, but often white misplays it. And you don't want to play knight a3 yourself, right? It's a bit difficult to come up with this yourself. They typically play moves like knight bd2, and then they end up losing the pawn or something. Like they lose control of their pawn, or it becomes really scary for white. That's why knight e3 is played. C takes c4. We just take now because after c takes d4, this knight is not going to c3 anymore. So this is why it's the right time to take on d4. So it all makes sense once you understand the specifics in the position, the details. When do I take on d4? When do I play f6? Here is a good time to take on d4 because they want to play knight c3 and now they can't. They have to waste so much time for that. So now we play knight f5, knight c2, and queen b6. So I have a question for you here. Now we have approached a position that, okay, we've developed our pieces. We're out of the opening pretty much, almost, kind of. What would you do? Let's say I give you a few moves to play here. Where would you put your pieces in the next few moves?
As black, yes?
As black, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we play queen b6. Let's say they play something like a short castle. I don't know.
Okay. I usually play rook c8 at some point. Sometimes I play with the knight on f5. I play h5 because a lot of the time there's g4 to kick the knight away. And then I will probably put my bishop on e7. I don't know. I always feel a little bit awkward about this bishop in the advance because I don't know where it's supposed to go. But I often put it on e7 and then I often short castle.
Yeah, that seems very fair. Yeah, I like those moves. What I want to, a little bit to teach you here is that you can safely play bishop e7. It's actually really well placed there. I mean, it doesn't really have many other squares. What people typically fall for in these kind of structures, that they tend to play g6. And I was guilty of this myself at the start as well. And I was told, you cannot play g6 if you have played e6. You can't do that. But it creates many, many weaknesses. If you play g6 and bishop g7, I mean, the bishop is well placed there, I guess, kind of, because you want to play f6, but it creates too many weaknesses. Bishop is perfectly fine on e7. And h5 is a really nice move, but you may want to wait with that a little bit because it weakens g5. Knight g5 might happen. It looks a little bit scary. Okay, not right now because d4 is hanging, but bishop g5, these kind of moves are moves that you need to look out for when you commit to a move like h5. The idea is very understandable. It makes so much sense to stop g4. But by playing bishop e7, if they play g4 now, you see where your knight can go now?
To h4, yeah.
Right, you can go to h4 and you don't mind this at all. I mean, okay, knight on the edge of the board is maybe not so great, but we're threatening to trade. We want to trade that knight. We'd love to. And then you can consider moves like h5 to open up this king side and potentially start an attack. But yeah, knight takes h4, bishop takes h4. It might seem a bit scary that they can play f4. But the nice thing about the French is that you can be flexible. You can stay with the king in the center. You can go short castle or long castle. Typically not long castle, but as you can see in this very specific situation, I think you would be more inclined to go long castle because there is no attack happening on the queen side whatsoever. So, and because white is pushing the pawns on the king side, we go long castle and h5. Okay, you have to be careful that your bishop does not get trapped, first of all. But I guess if I look really quickly, it should be fine. But it's, you have to be careful. You have to be cautious here. So maybe bishop e7 would be a good idea now. But the idea is that we're not afraid of this pawn push. We can simply counter it by h5 at some point, long castle, and there's not much play here for white because not only are they tied to the pawn on d4, but also on b2. So it becomes a bit difficult for white to play here. Also in the chat is pointed out g5, f5, knight takes e5. That is also very typical. It's one of the reasons why white typically goes for this prophylactical move of king h1 to avoid any sort of knight takes e5 captures. I've had games where I sometimes sacrificed my knight for 2 pawns, where I was getting on e5 the 2 pawns, and I got some really nice play there. But okay, in this situation, it's out of the question, obviously, because it's really well defended. But you definitely, it's definitely very typical idea in especially in this structure, with the queen on b6. So it's not so easy for white to attack. And that's why I wanted to show you that bishop e7 works just fine.
Okay.
And you can also consider, I mean, I like rook c8 a lot. I like it a lot. But perhaps it's okay to wait out what your opponent is doing. Because if they're very aggressive on the queen side, like they're going to play it like this, like craziness. Maybe you want to go long castle instead. So I guess one of the main moves that you can consider here, I'm trying to see, I mean, okay, I guess it's a little bit scary. I was going to say f6 would be nice if we could play that. But then I realized maybe g4 could be a bit tricky. Yeah, it's maybe not worth it. So perhaps playing h5 and then f6. That could be an idea. So you don't face any sort of g4. And so let's say h5. Oh, it's white to move. So let's say, I mean, what can white even do here? Let's say they play a3. I don't know. H5, b4, and then f6. And then after takes, we are attacking this pawn even more. And now it also becomes a bit more clear that we might be able to push our g-pawn. And then at some point, maybe we go long castle. And this attack over here is not so dangerous because the pawns are not going very far. The pawn on a3 needs to keep defending the pawn before. And this pawn, I mean, you can push it to b5, but I'll go knight a5 and your attack is just doomed forever. So yeah, this is basically what I wanted to share to you about the French, all the lines. I mean, they're not everything, and we only covered d4 as well on the second move, because you also have d3, and that's a complete different story, which might even transpose to a Sicilian if you play c5. I've played many different things here, but yeah, we mainly covered d4 today. And I hope it makes a bit sense, because it's a bit chaotic with all the different lines. But the idea, I try to keep it a bit minimal as much as possible, to also be able to draw like some patterns. Like, okay, in this line we played this, it also works in that line. So you can combine the ideas a bit like that. I have one question in chat. Let me see. H5, G5, and F6 maybe. Oh yeah, that was what I was saying. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, as a last thing, let's go through. I have 3 of my games prepared. I mean, to show you, to also show you like how it goes in practice. I mean, we talked about the lines, engine is happy, engine is unhappy, but how does it go in practice? Because that's a completely different story. I personally hate preparing openings because engine makes me super depressed. Like you feel like you have a nice position and the engine is like, no, it's just +1, or it's really bad for you because of this and that. And then I'm like, that's not human. But that's why seeing those games in practice is very important, I feel like. So let me copy game. Let me see how I do that. Maybe I should have. I'm so unfamiliar with oh, am I adding? I hope I'm adding a game. Okay, yes, it added.
Yay.
You see it?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, cool. It brought me to this new tab. I was like, oh no. Okay, so the first game, where's my, I'm so confused. Okay, here. So the first game I want to show you is about the terrace, and it is about this line that I showed you with knight f6. So here, e4, e6, d4, d5, knight e2, knight f6. So this was the line we covered where white goes e5, knight f d7, bishop d3, c5. This is all very straightforward. c3, knight c6, knight e2. And remember, what move do we play here? Don't worry if you don't remember. It's a bit too much.
Now we take on d4.
Yes, very good. We take, and now?
And now we can play f6.
Yes, very good, very good. So e takes f6, queen takes f6. This is exactly what happened in the game as we talked about earlier. Knight f3, h6, short castle, bishop d6. And here my opponent went for bishop b1. It's a very typical way of putting the bishop back, dropping it back, to make space for the queen, because having the queen ahead of the bishop is stronger and you can actually checkmate your opponent like that. So I went for short castle. I'm not afraid of this idea at all, because the funny thing is everything works out perfectly. Knight g3 is what my opponent played. And here I started this idea that I showed you, rook f7, remember? Yes. And here my opponent plays queen d3, and it looks very scary because, oh, there's checkmate. Okay, not really checkmate threats, but it is dangerous. It can get really dangerous. But I simply defend. This is exactly the idea that I had in mind. I play knight f8. My opponent played bishop d2. I played bishop d7. And I'm just following my plan without spending much time, because, I mean, my opponent is not really threatening anything. And the only threats they had, I was able to stop them in one move, because it's my plan as well. a3 is what they played, bishop e8. My opponent played bishop a2. I'm not sure why, but I have a feeling they wanted me to not play e5. They want to stop that. So they want to have d5, you know, they want to attack that. They want to have that in their sight. I play rook c7. I don't care. My opponent plays rook ae1. And here I go for g5. As I said, you can play bishop g6, whatever you prefer. But I want to spice it up a little bit and really go for the attack with g5. Bishop c3 is what they played to, I guess, defend the pawn on d4. And here I play bishop g6. And look how nicely, okay, after queen 2, look how nicely everything is developed. Like my bishop is on c6. Bishop c8, woo. Knight is on f8. It's doing its job. It's defending the pawn on e6. It's just there to defend the king as well. I mean, I don't really have much coverage anymore on the king side, so I could use a knight on f8. This rook is covering the 7th rank, as well as, you know, the c file, not too much because of this bishop, but it's doing its job. This rook will soon join the attack or the game in the center with rook e8. I can maybe even play rook c8. But the position is really nice for black. Like, all the pieces are developed, and it's clear where things are heading to, pretty much. Whereas for white, I mean, it's hard to see because this bishop is not only so well placed because it covers this whole diagonal, and it's fine being traded off for this light squared bishop. We're also stopping knight h5. So this knight is on g3, also a bit silly. I mean, it's defending, but not more than that. So let's see how the game continued. Queen f7, bishop b1. So they offered the trade. I'm happy to trade. Knight g6. I bring my knight out now because the pawn e6 is not attacked anymore. And I simply want to go to f4. I mean, it's a really nice square for my knight. Knight e5, bishop takes e5, d takes e5. And the reason why I took with the bishop, you might say, like, okay, that's a bit strange. You have a pretty strong bishop over here. Your pawns are, I mean, generally on the light squares. So why would you trade off your dark squared bishop? It was very concrete this time because I knew that I could play d4. And I knew that my knights were much more powerful. The knights are looking right at the pawn on e5, and it's a big weakness. So yeah, I thought d4 is amazing. And with the 2 knights on the board, bishop d2. I don't take the pawn just yet, because if I do so, I might run into some f4 moves. So currently, I'm trying to do anything I can to stop any sort of counterplay for white, which includes f4. f4 is a really, really dangerous move for me because not only are they opening up my king even more, it becomes really tricky on the f file. My queen is on f7, so rook f8, queen h5, queen g7. I'm taking it very easy. I mean, I have to defend the pawn, obviously, but this pawn is just a permanent weakness, and they are not able to defend it whatsoever. Queen h3, my opponent is just trying to attack some pieces here and there, some pawns. She played b4, I played knight f4, takes, knight e2, and here we go, f3. And yeah, we're just gonna crush on the king side now. So knight g3, she goes back, obviously. Knight takes e5, we got a pawn. G takes, rook takes, and yeah, we are simply allowing ourselves to have this attack, and it's a bit difficult to see how she can defend, because not only does she have problems on the king side, we also have this really nice center going on. She doesn't have this center whatsoever. So that's why it's so important. Like, once you are able to take those pawns in the center, your center becomes super strong. King h1. Queen g4, I was okay with trading because I'm a pawn up, and yeah, there's a lot of problems in white's position anyways. She took my pawn, and I was like, rook h7, queen c1. I played rook c3 because I wanted to open up the square for my knight. She thought knight e2, I guess she can play rook g1 to, you know, kind of win my queen back or something, because hers is under attack, but she can also win mine or something. But here I play rook takes h2, and the game was pretty much over. Yeah, and after king takes h2, rook h3 checkmate. She resigned already, but yeah, this goes to show how this can get so tricky for white. I mean, the engine says around, I mean, I guess around here-ish. Okay, a bit earlier. It's +1. Okay, maybe, yeah, bishop f1 should be fine. It's around +1. But it can go downhill so easily because you have a plan. And if white doesn't have a plan, white doesn't really have something clear in mind, it might get really dangerous, which is why I really like playing this line. It's not what I play currently every time or something, but I like it because it's very straightforward, very easy to play, and it fits my style. So it's pretty awesome.
It's cool. I've never seen this like rook f7 to swing the rook over. I haven't. So it's very cool.
It's quite original, and I think, I mean, you won't see it so much because it's simply not that great. Like, I think if Magnus or like the top players would play this, they would probably not be able to, you know, get such a nice win or something, because their opponents play really well and they know how to deal with this. But I feel like everything below that, I was taught by a coach. They taught me this, and he told me that there's this grandmaster that is playing this line religiously. And it was really interesting to me because, I mean, like he was almost calling him the inventor of this line because he was getting really nice positions and really great wins. And yeah, it's really inspiring. And yeah, I hope, I mean, you get to try this and maybe you get a nice win like that. But obviously it's hard to say like fully recommendation because it's not the very cleanest line. But okay, it's engine knows what to do. We are humans, we have a hard time figuring this out.
No, it's really cool, and I think especially at my level, like no one's gonna have prep or expect it or know what to do. So I don't think that it really matters, like +1 or whatever,
Yeah, right.
because
Yeah. I mean, +1 is quite big, but still, you have to know what you're doing. And the fact that you have a clear cut plan, and it's really hard for white to deal with that. It makes it a bit more interesting than just +1. Yeah. So let's go to the next game. I have 2 more games to show. We're gonna go through them real quick. They're not very okay. One game is long, but we're not gonna go through all of that because it's not relevant. But the second game I want to show you is pretty short.
I think whenever I'm slightly worse out of the opening, I always manage to pull it back. Whereas if I'm winning out of the opening, I feel like I get too comfortable and then.
That makes, I mean, yeah, it is relatable. I'm always worse from the opening myself. It's because I just don't really learn many openings. I haven't studied in a long time, so I'm pretty behind regarding all the developments and everything. But yeah, it's relatable. When you get too comfortable, it can go really wrong. Yeah. So yeah, this is I recently played this in the European Women's Chess Championship, and yeah, she played this line knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5. So this is in the classical variation with bishop g5 that we talked about, which can be a bit dry, a bit boring. But yeah, I played knight b7, she played knight f3, bishop e7, knight takes, bishop takes, and here she went for the line I showed you, h4. So
yes,
I played h6 because I want to get rid of this bishop. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and after queen d2, I went for c5. I believe it was not the most accurate move or something, like engine preferred short castle, but I could not deal with that because of the quick attack here.
Scary, yeah.
Yeah. So I played c5. Scary. I wanted to attack in the center first. Typically, the attack on the side, countering back in the center is a great idea. And c5 is a very typical move. So she went for long castle. I went for short castle this time. The nice thing about playing short castle, I guess, now is that after g4, you just take the knight. So you're not you're not too scared about g4 just yet. But after queen e3, you might have to be worried a little bit because now they're defending the knight. So g4 is actually their idea. And I tried to counter it now by playing b6. I took some time. It's not the most accurate move, but I didn't like what engine was telling me to do with c takes d4 and e5 and so on. I mean, I didn't really know what to do in this position, but I just wanted to play b6 because it felt more natural to me to try to play bishop b7. So she goes for queen e4, which is, as we saw before, it's a very typical move. Once the diagonal opens, there are some tricks there, but this time there's no bishop on d3, so that makes it up for it, so I can safely move my rook. But now comes the scary part, at least, well, quote unquote scary. Bishop d3. So you see that there's a direct checkmate threat, right? So how would you deal with this yourself?
I mean, there's g6. After g6, I don't know if there's like h5 stuff, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, it's very scary.
So I was looking at if it was playable to play queen f5 and you lose a pawn, but the queens are off. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be a bit too costly. So
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense you're considering those moves, especially G6, because that's very natural that you block this whole attack with a pawn, because that seems very resourceful. But the problem is after G6, H5, and
Yeah.
you're not necessarily losing right away or something, but King G7 you can play to defend. But we can quickly see here that the rook is opened, knight can quickly jump to E5 or H4 to attack, and it becomes very tricky. So the move that I played was rook d8. And you might be like, wait, you're just allowing this? Is what? And that's exactly what I'm allowing. Yeah, I'm allowing them to play queen h7. And I don't mind that they're going to attack me there, because I am okay with running to e7. Because once again, in the French, the structure is in such way that sometimes you're just fine standing in the center, sometimes. And this is one of those situations, because she played queen h7, I played king f8, and the attack kind of dies out. And because I kind of baited her into going into this, it was one of the reasons as well that I played b6, because I felt like she might be going for something like this, queen e4, bishop d3. And since I'm not losing on the spot, it might be interesting that she falls for this kind of trap where her queen is on h7, and it becomes difficult for her to continue the attack, because if she plays queen h8, I play king e7, and she has to go back. That makes no sense. And if she's not careful, I might even trap her queen. So that's why she played this move knight e5 here. It seems like, I mean, at first sight, it seems like she's just dropping the pawn, right? Like I can take, pawn takes, queen takes. It seems like that she had some tactic calculated, but there was a twist at some point. So rook he1 was played. I just want queen f6 back. I mean, I'm not scared of the check once again, because king e7, I'm defending it. I'm just making sure that my queen is close to my pieces, you know, and everything is defended. The pawns are very important. She played bishop b5, which looks a bit scary, because now if it's her move, it's actually checkmate in two, because the rook is defending now. So you have to play really carefully here. I played bishop b7. I was seeing what her plan was, which was queen h8, king e7. And here she played the move rook d7. And you might think like, oh gosh, that's terrifying, because I'm forced to take on d7, then queen takes b8, and my rook is under attack. And if my rook leaves, I lose the bishop. It looks really scary, right?
Yes.
So what is the move that I played here that made me feel confident about my position? Very confident.
Oh, well, I guess if you take on f2, you're threatening like the puzzle rush, queen d2,
Yes.
the little puzzle rush checkmate, so they don't have time to
Exactly.
take anything.
Right, queen takes f2, and that's exactly what happened in the game. And I saw this from miles away, and I mean, okay, I didn't saw this from like very far away, but once she played 95 or something, like a few moves back, I was like, she might be going for this. And I got so scared because it's like you have calculated all this, but what if you miss something? But I was pretty confident that this is just simply winning. And I double checked everything, triple checked everything. And after queen e5, she resigned after queen d2. And it was simply a checkmate. And that's how it goes to show. I wanted to show you with this game that even though they have this scary attack, even though they have this bishop and queen lined up, you're okay with playing rook d8. You're okay with them playing queen h7, and you can just run. Especially because your pawn on e6 is so strong. And you might think like, okay, but what if d5? Because if this is open, then running away might be a bit more tricky. I think, first of all, it's fine to take here, but just in case, you can always play e5. Or you can even ignore it. You can play knight e5, like, you name it. But it's not a big deal. And it's just not clear to see, like, what white's attack is, where it's going. And what she tried was really logical. It typically works, but for this reason that there's queen takes f2, that's the only reason why it didn't work. So yeah, it was a bit unfortunate for her, but it goes to show that sometimes it's okay that your opponent is attacking and they might over push and you're just fine. You're just fine and you're just capturing the material they give you and you simply defend and keep going. So that was a short game to show you how it can go in this line, the Tarash. No, not the Tarash, in the bishop g5 line. Yeah. And then I have one more game for you, which was also the Tarash, but the other variation that we saw, the c5 line. Here we go. Okay, let me flip the board. So yeah, I played against Salam Amelia. It was also in the European Women's Chess Championship. It was really awesome playing against her. She's international master. And yeah, we had this 92 on the board. So especially against higher-rated players, I feel very comfortable playing c5 because you basically get quite an equal position. It's not very difficult to play, I guess, compared to other lines, I would say. So, and it's just not risky. So I was happy with this. Knight gf3 is what she played. So here I took on d4, but she took on d5. So we transposed to the main line. Queen takes d5, bishop c4, queen d6. Remember, our idea is to go to c7. Short castle, knight f6, knight b3, knight c6. And yeah, typically like this is very well known. So typically these kind of moves go very quickly. Knight takes a6, rook e1, and here we go queen c7. And here she went bishop f1 instead. So it's clear that she wants to play g3, bishop g2, and stop me from moving the pawn pretty much. I just continued my development, bishop d6, g3, short castle, bishop g5, rook d8, queen f3. And you might be like, okay, before I continue, you're allowing them to take. And that is the interesting part about this line over here. You are okay if they take. It looks odd. It looks very difficult to deal with, but it's more difficult to deal with the fact that if you play knight d5 to run away from this bishop, you have to face c4, and then your knight has to move again, and you give white so much play here, and your knight is just very awkward, like knight e7, and yeah, what did you achieve really? Not really much, and it's really easy for white to play rook c1, bishop g2, bishop maybe goes back at some point when it's forced to do so. And yeah, white has a really nice position, and your position is not, I mean, not so great. Your bishop is not doing much here. Your bishop still needs to develop. Knight is very passive. So yeah, that's why I thought for a long time here what to do, because I don't want to move my knight and everything just looks passive. So I went for rook d8. And for some reason, she believed me. She did not take on f6 because, yeah, I guess after takes, what is very typical in this line that you get to play bishop e5. Sometimes bishop f4, but now with the pawn on g3, that's out of the question. But bishop e5 is a typical idea. And what is pretty typical in this position is that maybe you play bishop e5, f5, and bishop g7. If you park your bishop on g7, nobody's going to touch your king, especially with this pawn chain here, f5, e6, f7. Nobody's going to touch you, not in the near future. And she probably did not want to risk this, giving me the pair of bishops. And it was not very clear, I guess, for white how to continue, because I always have f5, bishop e5, bishop g7. So that's why she went for queen f3. And here I went with bishop e5. Now I am more than happy to go for bishop e5. I'm attacking the knight on d4 and also defending this knight. And nobody's gonna bother me here. There's no f4 or whatever. I guess they can play, not right now, but at some point, queen e3 to attack the bishop. But I'm not afraid of that, not at all. So c3 is what she played. And now I have time to play h6 and she has to go back. Now I'm happy to play knight d5 because I have a clear plan that after c4, I can simply take. Or even knight b4, and she might have some problems with some forks once the knight leaves. So there's a lot of problems there. Rook a d1. And here I'm happy to go b5, because now I'm safely able to play bishop b7, and everything works just fine. bishop c1, bishop b7. She went for queen h5. My bishop is under attack. I took on d4. The reason why is because I had a clear plan. All her pieces, almost all of them, are on the first rank. So that means you can afford to make very critical decisions.
Thank you.
Like bishop takes d4. And the reason why I wanted to go for this, look at how strong my bishop is on b7. Seeing that my bishop is controlling the whole diagonal pretty much once this knight leaves, and the fact that there's not a single piece of white on this diagonal, and you typically want to put a queen right in front of it to threaten some tricks there.
Yeah.
That's when a move like bishop takes d4 comes to mind. This knight is bothering me. I want to go to c6. So I take the knight off the board. I'm okay with this losing the pair of bishops because this bishop was not doing much anyways. It was doing a good job, but I have a clear plan. I want to go to c6. So I play knight f6 first to get the knight out of the way and attack the queen at the same time. And actually, if they play any move other than the move they played in the game, for example, let's say logical move would be queen e2. Just retreat, queen c6. And it becomes really difficult to see how they defend this threat, right? So I guess they can play f3, but you just take that and you win the pawn.
Yes.
You win a pawn and they have no compensation for this. None. I mean, the pair of bishops are not gonna do much there. They're not gonna help the position. So that's why, okay, first she took. That's good to do that in between. And then she went for queen h3. And the idea was that after queen c6, she plays bishop g2. And I'll just play a few more moves because it's quite a long game. But just to illustrate what you could do in the next few moves, what the plans are. So one thing to note is that in this structure, white has the majority on this queen side. And this allows them to at a later stage create a passed pawn. And that might be a bit difficult to deal with because we have the majority here on this side, but we can never create a passed pawn. I mean, in the very, very end game. But a bit before that, white is able to create a passed pawn, and that is very annoying to deal with. And that's why white typically has a small edge, I would say, if they manage to play moves like a4 and then create a passed pawn somehow. But it's obvious to see from this position that this is not going to happen anytime soon. It is really difficult to, this pawn is supposed to be the passed pawn, but you cannot play c4 anytime soon. And even if you get to play, there is a lot of issues with white's position, especially because the pieces are on the first rank right now. That makes it a bit difficult for white to consolidate and try to get some sort of advantage. And knowing that queen c6 is not really working right now, so you might say, okay, I'm fine trading everything off, but I was hungry. I was looking for more. So I start to think I want to create some weaknesses. So I start with the move queen a5. And it looks a bit superficial, I would say, not very obvious, but she basically has to play a3 because otherwise she loses the pawn. And as you can see, now all those light squares are so weak. They're so weak. This bishop is not going there anytime soon, pretty much never. White doesn't have any other piece to cover those squares. Those squares are mine. Those squares are mine, and I'm claiming them. So I play queen a4. And the idea is that I play rook d1. And I'm simply dominating on light squares. And that goes to show how important it is to have your pieces active, because her pieces are as passive as it can get. She tries to get out of it, bishop e2, but I just enter with queen c2, queen f1. And yeah, it's a bit difficult to see how to, push things further because I have such a nice position. But you have to be a bit careful that, she plays bishop d1. She untangles herself from this horrible position. So I went for knight e4 to enter the knight into the attack pretty much. Rook d1, and here I played knight e2. And here she has this problem that I play queen e4 and she doesn't have the bishop covering that. So queen e1, queen e4, And yeah, she was forced to play f3. And after knight takes f3, we got into an end game that I was able to convert after, the game lasts for 61 moves. So I'm not gonna bother you with that, but I just wanted to show you briefly how you could, after the opening, how you deal with the position, what the position is asking from you, the pawn structure. It's so important to look at that, because as you see that, you can create a weakness, you push them to play a3, they're forced to do that. It suddenly asks you to create those weaknesses and put your pieces on those weak squares, on all the light squares. And yeah, that's basically how you build up the position and you go further like that. So yeah, it's maybe a bit too much for now, but I will send you the games as well as the analysis after this, so that you can, at your own pace, try to go through them. And if you have any questions, of course, let me know. And if you also have questions right now, feel free to ask them, because a new opening or new lines, they might feel very overwhelming at first. I always thought it was pretty overwhelming at first, because I don't know what I'm looking at, and it's just all a miracle to me. But as you go, as you play, you ask yourself questions, and you answer them as you prepare, or as you are analyzing your openings and so on. So yeah, just try to have like some sense of the openings if you want to try them out. I hope they were interesting enough for you to try them out. But yeah, these are basically some of my lines, some of my previous lines, some of my current and past lines whatsoever. So
thank you so much.
I hope it was understandable.
Yeah, no, of course it was. Don't be silly. It was really cool. And there were definitely things that I haven't seen pop up anywhere else. So I'm really looking forward. I'm really looking forward to trying some of them out.
Now. I mean, it's, you know what the thing is for me personally? I mean, it's one of the reasons why I deviate so much, because all my lines are out there. These are all my games. It's I can't really, hide it or anything like that. So I don't mind sharing it at all. And I thought it might be interesting for you as well. So I hope you take away something from this, and that also the audience was understanding this a little bit, because I saw a few questions, I was not able to answer them, but I hope it makes sense in some way.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really, really good last night. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And we're doing a sub battle soon, aren't we? Next month.
We are. We are. Yeah, we don't have a date plan just yet, I think. But...
Not yet, but soon.
Yeah, soon.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Me too.
But thank you so much. I had
My pleasure.
It was a great lesson, very instructive, and yeah, if you could send the file over, that would be awesome.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Do I? I'll just share the PGN or maybe on chess.com. Like you can. Sorry.
Oh yeah, that would be fine.
Okay. Yeah.
Or I don't know if you can like download the classroom or not.
I mean, I have them in my chess base. So
yeah,
it's just
exactly.
Putting it in, like maybe what is it called, library? Maybe that's Yeah, I'll see what works best.
Thank you so much.
But yeah, I'll share the lines, and if you have any questions, let me know. Feel free to ask. There's so much to the French, and this is only like a little bit of it. So you might run into things that are like, hey, she did not cover this, or hey, this is new. What is this? So if that's the case, don't be surprised, because there's just so much. And
no, of course. I don't really see much other than e4 d4. The first time I tried to play the French over the board, they actually played e4 d3, but that was
right.
That was fine. And then
it's a whole different story when they play d3. It's just so different. And typically when they just play something else like that, you just try to develop. Just play like any move you would play normally, like c5, d5, knight c6. Like just play.
Yeah, that's what happened. It was just a game of chess at that point, because I didn't know any theory.
Right. And I guess on the one hand, it might be a bit difficult to do that because you don't know what you're doing. But on the other hand, as long as you're just developing the pieces, just following all the chess principles, all the basics, you should be fine.
Yes, in theory. Thank you so much, Anna.
Yep. My pleasure.
Yeah, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Good luck in the tournament you're playing.
Thank you so much. It's my first. I'm gonna get a FIDE Blitz rating. I don't have one yet.
Oh, what
Yeah,
time
so
control
that'll
is
be
it?
cool. It's 3+2, so that feels really short over
Oh.
the board.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yes. Online it feels like much longer, as in the 2
Mm.
seconds increments are quite valuable. But
Yeah.
OTB it's like 3+0. So
Yes.
yeah, good luck. You got this. You got this. I mean, I don't know if you're able to use the lines I showed you today. It might be a bit too much, but who knows?
Mhm. Fingers crossed. I've been trying to learn some gambits with white, so that's I
Oh,
guess we're gonna see how that goes as well.
that is really useful, especially in Blitz. Yeah, that will be very useful.
Thank you so much for the lesson, though. I really appreciate
My pleasure.
it.
It's my pleasure. It was
I'm
a
glad
lot
that
of
we could
fun.
finally do it because we haven't done a collab
Yeah.
before, so that's cool.
Yeah, this is actually the first time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we'll do more. We'll do more for sure. Thank
For
you so
sure.
much, Lula, for agreeing to do this. And
Of course,
good
I had
luck in
so
your
much fun.
tournament.
Yes, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sounds
Bye.
great. Bye.
Okay, I didn't actually set up this overlay before coming on stream. Hi guys, how did you find the lesson? I thought it was super instructive. I've never actually had like a lesson on the French before, like as an opening in general. Only ever like specific lines, so I found that very good, very helpful. So I've just kind of been winging it. Oh, why am I lagging? Give me one sec. Why am I lagging? Okay, we're fine. Oh, we're still a bit laggy. I think it's fine. No, I'm out of sync. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Ooh, I'm more zoomed in. I don't know what's happening with my camera. Hello, Mr. Dodgy. Welcome back to Twitch. I am... Maybe it's because I'm still in the Zoom call. I don't know. Anyway, I wasn't going to stream for that much longer because I have a Blitz tournament. Let me try and fix this. Okay, I think it's fine. I have a Blitz tournament. Maybe it's not fine. I just don't want to reset up my camera now that we've had a collab with Zoom. But yeah, I was actually just got a message from the person I'm going to be going to the Blitz tournament with, and they can't make it. And I'm still lagging, and I don't know why. But so I think I'm going by myself. You're sure that I'll win the Blitz tournament? Oh, you're being nice to me in chat because you got punished. Okay, hold on. I'm going to try and fix this camera. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, you're being nice to me now because you got suspended from Twitch for a week. That wasn't actually my fault. I did not get you suspended from Twitch for a week, Mr. Dodgy. I think I'm gonna raid AnnaMaja, honestly. I don't know why I'm having tech problems. Okay, the tech problems are done. As soon as I said I was gonna stop streaming, my computer decided to fix itself. I'm gonna raid AnnaMaja anyway, I think, because I don't know, I guess now I have to try and find somebody else to take me to the Blitz tournament. Why'd people sad? I'm actually gonna go by myself. I'm gonna be very independent adult, and I'm gonna go to the Blitz tournament all on my own, and it's gonna be just fine for reasons. Definitely gonna be just fine. No, I'm really stressed about it actually. But at least I know more French theory than I knew this morning. Okay, guys, thank you so much for hanging out for the lesson with AnnaMaja. If you don't follow her, you should definitely check her out. And I will be back tomorrow. Will I? Yes, I'll be back tomorrow. And tomorrow is my last stream before my IRL stream from Chesham Bridge. So come along if you're in London on Saturday. Get a Blitz game with me from Chesham Bridge in London. Let's raid AnnaMaja. And I will see you all tomorrow. Because there's just too much lag for me to continue the stream. I don't know why it's just odd. At least it didn't lag during the collab. That's fine.